friends, welcome to my channel Charismatic Literature. Here you can find all the materials and videos related with the literature and language. Friends, I am Shri Ayas, Assistant Professor of English, Shri Vasantrao Naik Arts and Amarsin Naik Commerce College, Number 10. Today we have with us a famous and eminent scholar, personality, Professor Nitin Patil sir, Assistant Professor of English, Pratap College, Amalner. He is going to deliver a lecture, a talk on importance of literary theory in literature. Before starting his speech, I would like to introduce him to the spectator and all the audience. Friends, he is very lucky. Why I am saying so? Because he completed his undergraduation and post-graduation from the same college where he is working now as an assistant professor. So that's why I said that he is very lucky. My friends, he was stood first in national level entrance examination of MPhil PhD conducted by Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi in 2012, and registered himself as an external student of PhD at Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. My friends, he has invited for the lecture series as visiting fellow at Cornell University in United States of America. He has also visited and delivered lecture at New York University as well as Columbia University. My friend, and most importantly, he was selected as participant for master class by Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak on James Coetzee and Franz Fanon at Pune University, Savitribai Phule, Pune University, Pune. In addition to it, he has also invited for international conference on modern literary theory as a keynote speaker, which was held at Aurangabad. My friends, apart from this, he has also tried his hand in publication. So he has published total 8 articles in national and international journal. He also read near about 23 articles, research paper in conference and seminars and symposium. My friends, so without taking too much time that I already consumed, I think I would like to request Professor Nitin Patil sir for his address. Professor Nitin Patil sir, the stage is all yours, sir. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you so much for this extremely generous introduction, and thank you very much for starting bang on time almost. And thank you very much for this extremely generous introduction which you have given me and this invitation. So I thank all the organizers and participants for giving me this opportunity. Uh, I would like to begin my talk with an anecdote. As in my introduction, it was told that I was selected as the visiting fellow at School of Criticism and Theory at Cornell University. This was a rare occasion, and so I went to USA and I was there, and it was almost 6 months long program, and I was there. Throughout those 6 months, nobody had dared to ask this question as to what literary theory is or what contemporary theory is and what it does. As we were drawing close towards the end of the that fellowship period, on the very last day of that program, I had an opportunity to share to be on a panel with other people from different Western universities. And in that session, it so happened that one of my co-panelists was a very well-known philosopher from Israel. His name is Avishai Margalit. I hope you can Google him. And we were five panelists, and then Avishai Margaret, because he has his own position regarding theory and other things. So when his turn came up, he started with the question that this particular institute is named as school for criticism and theory. And he said that I can understand the first part of it, that is it's a school of criticism, but I don't understand the later part, that is school of theory. So he said that what theory is this, theory of what? I mean, and he said that I know there is Newtonian theory of this, and there is Einsteinian theory of that, and this and that. So he gave examples from science, and he said that but what is this contemporary theory? What does it talk about? So that was the question which we had not thought about it, and it made us really think out of our skins to answer that question now. So this is why this anecdote, because I want you people to get and give you some idea about the kind of hostility which this particular term has to face even in the Western academia, let alone the Indian situation. So keeping this anecdote in mind, I'll come back to this anecdote towards the end of my talk. So when we say that, there are quite a few people who enroll themselves for PhD programs, and, research supervisors these days talk about, okay, fine, you are going to study this author, you are going to study this particular phenomenon, but what is the theory you are going to use? So now we have almost taken it for granted that we need to do theory in order to study literature, or in order to do cultural studies. So it's almost taken for granted that there is something called as theory, and that's why you people have also given this particular topic to me, that what is the importance of literary theory. But this phenomenon called literary theory is a very heterogeneous entity. It is uh, if you look at the names which are associated with this particular phenomenon, then you would see that it is hardly anything, it has hardly anything to do with literature. For example, what is theory? The one of the answers to that question could be, theory is thought put forward by Jacques Derrida, Foucault, Lacan, Barthes, Butler, Spivak, and company. And so if you look at what these people have talked about, especially, it's a French phenomenon. Whatever is called as theory came from France, and it entered into in American academia, and after that it entered everywhere. So if you look at all these thinkers, for example, Lacan, he was a psychoanalyst. Barthes or Foucault, it would be very difficult to pigeonhole Foucault. What did he write about, and what did he talk about? In fact, there is a very interesting anecdote. When he was elected as the professor at Collège de France, the college actually inquired as to how they should title his chair, because professors are given distinguished chairs. So they were not sure about which discipline does he belong to, and that is why they asked him as to what kind of title should they give to the chair which he was going to occupy. And he came up with a very interesting nomenclature. He said that call it the professor of systems of thoughts. That is what he said. So that gives you an idea that it's a very heterogeneous phenomenon. So calling it literary theory is a kind of is a kind of risky step, because if you look at this title, literary theory, okay, let us not talk about that part now, but the adjective which comes before, is it literary? So if you look at this particular term, the sense which we get is that it is the theory about literature. It talks about what is literature, and it talks about, it should ideally, but it is not like that. It doesn't talk about literature per se. It talks about whole lot of things. It talks about everything under the sun, as its critics would say. But still, the name has stuck, and we call it literary theory. So now what exactly is this? So I'll begin with a very simple thing. Unfortunately, we in India, we are very West oriented. Whatever happens in the Western academia, it slowly comes to Indian scene, and then we try to do those things. So this thing called as literary theory, first, it exploded on the scene of especially American academy. It started doing rounds in America, and then later on it percolated in the Western academia, and from there it has come to India. Now, if you look at this particular phenomenon, then we will have to take the certain things into account. So this thing called as theory, what exactly is this? So another way of looking at it, I hate to speak such language. I don't like using such lugubrious sentences, but it serves my purpose, so I will use it, and then later on maybe I will unpack it. So what is theories? To my mind, theory is, please listen to it carefully, and if someone picks it up in question and answer session, I will be able to speak a little bit about it. So theory is, it's a knowledge about knowledge as knowledge. Now this is a bizarre sentence. Theory is a knowledge about knowledge as knowledge. It's like Heideggerian text. But this particular definition, I've already told you that I don't use I don't like using this kind of jargon and this kind of language. But this particular definition certainly serves our purpose. That is why I've deliberately used this definition, which I will be explaining later on. So I said that theory is a knowledge about knowledge as knowledge. So now what exactly is this? See, when any literary discipline comes into being, or sorry, any discipline, when it comes to being, it has to answer certain questions. For example, physics. So first of all, it will have to answer three important questions. What is the object of study? What is the methodology of the what is the methodology of studying that object of knowledge? And the third thing is that the rationale. Why should we study it in the first place? So literature is a very strange excuse me. Literature is a very strange discipline. When you talk about natural sciences, when you talk about social sciences, they have a very well defined object of knowledge. For example, let us take an example of social sciences, political science, this particular discipline. So what does it do? What is its object of knowledge? Its object of knowledge is society and the political behavior, the political pattern, the political thinking which goes on in the society. That's its object of knowledge. Secondly, how would it study it? Then they have their qualitative, quantitative methods of studying that particular thing. And why should we study it? We should study it because, we want to understand the political behavior of societies, and we want to study it because we want to create a better society. That is why we should study it. Now, in case of literature, it's a very strange thing. Literature as a discipline is not very old discipline. It came into existence in the 19th century, especially in England and America. Those academies, they were the ones who actually created this particular discipline. And please, here we in India need to take one thing into account, and we need to stop a little and think a little here. And we need to ask this question to ourselves, and the question is, when was literature, or when was British literature, or where was British literature studied as an academic discipline for the first time? Now, if you ask this question to yourself, naturally the answer would be England or America. But hold on for a minute. English literature as an academic discipline was first of all introduced in India. We all know that infamous Minute on Indian Education by Thomas Babington Macaulay, 1835, where he came up with the where he came up with the recommendation that the natives being Indians, should be given English education, and that is why he started, and then the policy was drawn up. I think we all are aware of that famous book which Gauri Vishwanathan wrote in 1989, The Masks of Conquest. Now, why is that book important? That book is important because Macaulay, and there are quite a few people around even today who say that, oh, British colonialism was really wonderful thing which happened to India. Now, that can be debated, that can be discussed, but for us, let us look at this Minute on Indian Education. What was Macaulay's motive behind coming up with this kind of recommendations. Now, we all have read that minute, I hope, at one point or the other, but there are a couple of things which I want your attention, which I would like to draw your attention to. One of the things is that Macaulay in that minute says that English education should be preferred over indigenous knowledge systems because Indian languages do not have any significant knowledge produced in them, and Macaulay did not know Indian languages, and still he made this claim. And secondly, and which is more dangerous thing, he said that if we give English education to the natives, we will be able to create a class which will be English in taste and thinking, and Indian only in color. So basically, the purpose was to impose the culture of the colonizer upon us, so that we will feel inferior and things like that. So that is the provenance, that is the origin of English literary studies in India. So that is something which we need to think about very seriously. But let me take you back to England and America. When this particular discipline was introduced in England and America, the purpose was, 19th century is the century of industrialization, and that was the century when the class differences in English society especially surfaced, and the lower classes, the working classes, were agitating for their rights and things like that. So as if the unity of that particular society was gone, and that is why some of the educators were of the opinion that if we teach these people values, then maybe we will be able to create something called as English identity or American identity. So one of the basic purposes of introducing literary studies as a discipline into, especially in England, was to gloss over those class differences, and to create a, let us say, I would say, a bogus unity, cultural unity, because no culture is homogeneous. Every culture is heterogeneous. So, but they wanted to impose that kind of identity, and that is why they thought that religion is losing its force. So, if there is anything which can hold the whole society together, and that can be literature, And Matthew Arnold, we all know, poetry is the best that man has thought and said. So he said that the repository of values, especially English values, is the literature which is produced, which has been produced in our country. And that is why they said that if we give this kind of education to the people, then maybe this kind of class conflict, which is raging in our society, will go away. So this is how very hastily English literary studies was instituted in England. But then the second question, so the first question was answered: what is this discipline and what is the object of knowledge? The object of knowledge is literature, literary works. Second thing is now, what is the methodology? How are you going to study that particular object of knowledge? So naturally, reading. We all read. And there is a very funny incident when this whole talk came up during one of the academic discussions in the 1850s in Oxford. There was a history professor, his name was Edward Freeman, if I remember the name correctly. He said that, this new discipline which you people are proposing, English literature or English literary studies, where people will read Shelley, Keats, Byron, Shakespeare, and, they will become better human beings by reading these by reading these works of art. That's fine. But we are in university and we need to assess our students, examination system. So how are we going to assess in the examination whether X has become a better person over the period of time? So what will be the criteria of evaluating the students and the progress which the students has made, which the progress that particular student has made? And nobody had answer to this question, and the proposal did not sail through. So the first attempt at Oxford of introducing English literature was not successful, because see, this is a basic question. And if I ask this question, we all teach literature, I can see people from all over the country have joined. Let us ask this question to ourselves as to why do we teach literature? Hmm? What is the purpose behind teaching literature? I think most of us will answer that, literature talks about universal values, literature talks about human values, literature, gives you aesthetic pleasure and things like that. And that is why this particular discipline is in existence. We are here because we want to make our students better human beings. But then the question which Mr. Friedman raised in 1850s, it still haunts us. How are we going to assess whether somebody who took admission for BA English program has become a better human being? How are we going to judge it? So these were the questions which the first generation of literary critics had great difficulty coming to terms with. And then we know that when this particular subject was introduced at Oxford and Cambridge, later on, a standard method of studying literature and reading literature came into being, and that was practical criticism, which was propounded by I.A. Richards, where he started looking at literature, taking away the context and everything, and looking at the form, looking at the complex value system of the text. So new criticism basically was the answer. But then, each and every critical paradigm had its own problem. So this thing which we called as theory started raging in 1950s and 1960s. Now, what was this thing called as theory? So if you look at the stuff which is called as theory and which has entered into English literature departments, you will see that these are the texts which are full of either political theory, psychoanalysis, cultural analysis, power politics of different sorts, some highly difficult philosophical texts, for example, Jacques Derrida and company. So these were the things which were coming up on scene in the 1950s, and people who were of the opinion that who were not happy with the the paradigms of new criticism and practical criticism, they thought that literature can be studied by using these different methods, and it can certainly produce some good results by doing that. And please remember one thing, that majority of these theoreticians, especially who came from, say, philosophy background, came from the academic discipline of philosophy, they were not welcome in philosophy departments. Please remember, the first visiting professorship which Jacques Derrida got on American campus was in the Department of English at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. Or you could see that, when Foucault received his first visiting professorship, that was California, Berkeley, but that was also in philosophy and history departments, not literature departments, or not in philosophy departments. So theory is that kind of writing which raises some very important questions about how we look at our objects of knowledge and how we look at the knowledge production. So these were very important thoughts which were put forward by these diverse thinkers, and people in literature departments, because they thought that we do not have adequately scientific or adequately let us say academic way of dealing with these works of art, can fall back on these methodologies and can use them, can harness them in understanding literature well. And this is how this diverse writing, Barth, Lacan, Foucault, Deleuze, Guattari, and other people, they started entering into English literature departments, and there was tremendous resistance to this. I must tell you an anecdote here. When Jacques Derrida, when he had established himself as a world-class thinker, when it was decided that an honorary PhD should be awarded to him, it was decided by Cambridge University, and Frank Kermode and company, they played very important role in it. You would scarcely believe that the majority of the faculty of Cambridge University was of the opinion that he should not be given PhD degree because he has not produced significant body of knowledge. In fact, if I could use that word, he is a charlatan. Charlatan means, shape shifter. People have called him all kinds of things. So, that kind of hostility, that kind of resistance. Now, if I there is a very interesting thing why this hostility, why this resistance? This is a very productive question to look at. This is a very interesting way of looking at this particular phenomenon. So what I want to tell you at this particular moment in time, that theory was a diverse writing which was produced by many thinkers in their respective disciplines. For example, if you look at Foucault, then Foucault studied everything which is not considered as worth studying. In fact, if I remember one of his if I could quote if I could quote one of his interviews to you, in where he says that I was reasonable enough to study madness and I was mad enough to study reason. That was his interesting way of thinking it, because he wrote that famous book called um, history of madness and civilization, and other discipline and punish. So what was theory? Theory was a very challenging reflexive writing which was done by academic philosophers, historians, psychoanalysts, people who study psychoanalysis, people who studied political theory, people who studied philosophy. And these theory, because this diverse writing raised some very important questions regarding culture, regarding human psyche, regarding language, regarding meaning, regarding interpretation. Here I would like to bring to your notice that the famous article which Jacques Derrida wrote, Science Structure and the Discourse of Human Science and Free Play in the Discourse of Human Sciences, that particular article begins with an epigram from one of the essays by Montaigne, and the epigram says that we need to interpret the interpretation. So why did I give this example? Because I want to bring to your notice that the thing which was called as theory was basically diverse intellectual writing which was produced in different different academic disciplines. Why did it come to literature departments? It came to literature departments because this kind of writing was very reflexive, was very self-reflexive. That is why it was not accommodated in those disciplines. Many philosophers even till this date think that Derrida was a bogus philosopher. In fact, it doesn't have any significant to say that. That is what many academic and well-reputed philosophers say, because their way of looking at philosophy is different, and Jacques Derrida's way of looking at philosophy is different. So that is why this writing, which was produced in these different intellectual fields, was like a hot potato, too difficult to handle. And naturally, this particular kind of writing sipped in very slowly into literature departments. Literature department was open to it in a way because literature department did not have that kind of methodology. In fact, if you in the 1950s, one of the famous books of literary criticism which came out was Anatomy of Criticism by Northrop Frye, where he says that any discipline, if it wants to be worthwhile discipline, if it wants to worth its salt, if I could use his phrase, then he said that it has to have that kind of scientific methodology of knowledge. Literature lacked it, and I remember one of my professors from American universities, and women participants will excuse me for this kind of a statement, but he used to say this. He used to say that literature is a very promiscuous discipline. It has to sleep with multiple partners to produce knowledge, and sometimes that is why literature has to take help of sociology, literature has to take help of psychoanalysis, literature has to take help of let us say some new historical perspective. So this is how we have to have that kind of support from other disciplines. That is why this writing very slowly entered into departments. It's completely transformed the scene of literary studies in the Western academia as well as in our academia. Now, what I mean, this kind, it's almost impossible to define theory, because if you come up with one particular definition, then you would say, because these people had very interesting things to say about things, the relationship between language and meaning. If you read Jacques Derrida seriously, he would say that it's very difficult to carry out meaning in the language because language does not reflect meaning, because it constructs meaning, and language being slippery medium, the meaning is always all out of the grasp. So if I try to define theory, that theory is X, then I am actually contradicting myself, because theory says that no definite meaning is possible. So how come I'm able to define theory? So I'll give you a working definition. I'll save my skin and I'll give you a working definition. The working definition of theory is, or literary theory is, that it is a diverse intellectual writing which was produced in different academic disciplines. And this kind of writing, as it was difficult for those disciplines to handle, slowly settled in, or slowly sipped in literary studies departments. That particular writing is called as theory. So instead of defining theory and going into that direction, I would like to bring to your notice certain characteristics of theory. What is this thing called as theory, and what are its characteristics? So I would say the first characteristic of the thing which we called as theory is that it is interdisciplinary. Now, please look at this particular tag called as interdisciplinary. Now, what do I mean that it is interdisciplinary? I've already told you that this these kind of thoughts, these kind of insights which we use today, for example, feminism. Feminism falls a great, uses a great deal of let us say psychoanalysis. I'm talking about French feminism. If we talk about post-colonial readings, then post-colonialism uses history, it uses philosophy, it uses psychology, depends upon which thinker you are reading. So naturally, theory is interdisciplinary in nature. It actually tries to bring different disciplines together. For example, if we read Homi Bhabha, then at one point he talks about history, the second moment he talks about psychoanalysis, third time he talks about continental philosophy. So it's very interdisciplinary in nature, and that is why no one can master theory. If there are people who say that, oh, I am a master of theory, there are people who say that he's a master of theory. It is impossible to master theory, because it is so interdisciplinary in nature. It is produced in different disciplines, I should say, and from those disciplines it comes to be used by other people. So this is one thing in which we need to take into account. Second thing is that, what is this theory? I would say that theory is analytical and speculative. And now analytical, it tries to analyze a particular phenomenon. For example, Freud. Freud, we all are human beings, and we behave in a particular way, we think in a particular way. So Freud, who was a who was a medical doctor, he tried to look at this particular phenomenon, this particular peculiar behavior of his patients. He collected that data and he tried to interpret, and he came up with the theory of human psyche. Now, anatomically speaking, if you open up a human body, you won't see mind anywhere. Brain is there, but mind is missing. Psychoanalysis is a very strange discipline. It tries to study something which doesn't have a concrete existence. Now, if you open up a human body, there's nothing called as mind. There is something called organ called as brain, but mind is completely missing. So where is mind? That is another. Okay, so it is analytical, because if you look at Foucault, Derrida, Barthes, I'm taking these names and others as well. Their writings are very analytical. They try to analyze a particular phenomenon. So one of the attempts of defining theory is that theory is a bunch of concepts which tries to understand a particular phenomenon. To give you a very crude example, if I hold something in my hand and if I let that thing go down from my hand, it will fall down. That is a phenomenon. Now, why did that happen? That happened because somebody would say there is gravity. Now, we haven't seen gravity, but that concept of gravity explains this phenomenon, the thing falling down. So now theory, so all these writing, which we term as theory, was very analytical in nature. For example, if you read Foucault's Discipline and Punish, that book is a very strange book and a very important book. That book deals with the concept of punishment. Now, imagine anybody talking about the concept of punishment in literature departments. That was not thought of. That is even not thought of in history. But he talks about the concept of punishment and how it has evolved over the period of time, and what kind of a role that concept has played, or his later books on sexuality, the concept of sexuality. We in literature departments think that 19th century tried to replace the concept of sex and sexuality, and the moderns, that is the 20th century people, tried to rescue that concept. So we were very we pat our backs and we say that we are very liberals, and we have retrieved this particular idea. But if you read the first volume of History of Sexuality by Michel Foucault, he brings to our notice as to how this very idea of sex and sexuality and the role, the social, cultural, political role that concept played later on was actually constructed in the 19th century. Now, I gave you this example because I want to bring to your notice one of the characteristics of theory, that it is analytical. It takes a phenomenon, it tries to analyze that phenomenon. And second thing, theories are speculative. Speculative because you don't have a concrete proof. When Freud talked about it serves a purpose. It explains so many things to us. So theory is analytical in nature and it is speculative in nature. That's the second characteristic. The third characteristic, which is a very important characteristic, is that theory is a critique of common sense. Now, what do I mean by common sense? Remember Oscar Wilde, who said that common sense is not so common. So common sense means, for example, if we are all literature teachers, then we take certain things for granted. Things like literature, things like text, things like author, things like interpretation. These are givens. These are the things which we take for granted. We go to a classroom and we say that now I'm going to teach you this particular poem, and this is a wonderful work of literature, and we are going to read it, and then we are going to come out with the meaning of or interpretation of this particular poem. So now see how many things are taken for granted. Literature, the idea of literature, the idea of interpretation, the idea of meaning, the idea of language, the idea of, or someone will go to the classroom and will say that now I'm going to teach you Othello, and let us establish a relationship between Elizabethan society and this particular play. Now here we have taken into account, or we've always taken for granted that there is something called as a play, and that play has a meaning, it has a social relationship. So there are so many things which we take for granted. One of the radical things about theory, and why people are scared of theory, is that it tries to critique, critique, it tries to critique these givens, these commonsensical ideas which we have taken for granted. For example, there's that famous essay by Stanley Fish, Is There a Text in the Class? Now this is a very interesting title. Is there a text in the class? So what is the text? And people, or Roland Barthes' famous essay From Work to Text, we used to say that this is a work of art, and now we say that this is a text. So what is the work, and how did the concept of work travel to the concept of text? So theory tries to critique these commonsensical ideas, or these taken for granted ideas, or things which we have never thought of. And this is something which is very, very radical about theory. And the last concept, which I think, last characteristic of theory, there can be n number of characteristics, but these are the four characteristics which I think that are useful for our discussion here. The last characteristic is it is reflexive. It is reflexive. It is autocritical. If I may use that word. Autocritical means, it tries to analyze the commonsensical ideas, but it even analyzes itself. It analyzes itself means, it doesn't take anything for granted. It even doesn't take the ground on which it is standing for granted. And that is why the deconstructionists always say that, grounding as an error, whatever material you are going to begin with, that material is also subjected, or that point of view is also subjected for, critique. nothing is taken for granted, and that is why people are very, very, very uncomfortable with deconstruction. They are so uncomfortable with deconstruction that whenever they get an opportunity to defame deconstruction, people join the ranks and people don't hold back anything. I'll just give you two examples. Deconstruction was popularized in American academy by a man called Paul Deman, who was a Belgian academic who spent most of his life in America. He was he was Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak's PhD supervisor, and he was instrumental in bringing Derrida to America. So in 1983 he died. In 19 till 1983 he was an academic superstar, and people could not find problems with his academic positions and his way of theorizing and everything. In 1988 somebody was working on his writings, and that person came across a fact that before coming to America, when Deman was living in Belgium, Deman wrote for a newspaper which was supported by Nazi party, uh, Hitler's political ideology, and he has contributed certain articles to that newspaper. Now, those if Deman has written anything which is anti-Semitic in nature, Deman should be criticized. But the only thing that he wrote for this particular publication became a huge news in America, and Deman was, and remember that the man had died in 1983. Everybody said that, see, this is how deconstruction is irresponsible, and deconstruction should be disbanded, and this and that. So look at the kind of intellectual insecurity, I should say, people have. The second example is a recent example. Now there are some people who are champion of Derridian writing and Derridian thought in American academia. The major names are Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak, Judith Butler, and Avital Ronell. In 2017, I was in America, and around the same time, Me Too movement was taking place there also, and Avital Ronell's PhD student at NYU uh, lodged a complaint of sexual harassment against his PhD dissertation director, Avital Ronell, who happens to be a queer person, a lesbian. And now, if there is some truth in it, Avital Ronell should be punished for it. But people got an opportunity, and people once again started beating deconstruction. Now, here is a case of one person harassing the other person sexually. If there is any truth in it, person should be punished. But that became an opportunity where people started bashing deconstruction once again and started saying that, oh, deconstruction is bad. And I'm not talking about the common public. I'm talking about some very, very respected academicians who are based in American academia. So what I am trying to tell you is that theory has this kind of resistance. And why theory has this kind of resistance? It's because of those four characteristics which I have just enumerated. Because these, if you take theory seriously, which we should, then it completely reorients your academic discipline. It completely orients the way we do literature study. It is not the business as usual. It completely transforms your field, and that is why people are not comfortable with it. People are not that ready to accept this kind of change. So this is what has happened over the period, and these are the very important characteristics which I just enumerated to you. Now, what has happened? Now, if you look at the number of publications which come out of, let us say, Western academia, you would see that there are quite a few books. I can at least give you 3 to 4 titles right now who are who are titled as Death of Theory, After Theory, this kind of titles. So people believe that now theory is gone, which is not true at all. Theory is there, and theory is pretty much there to stay, and it has completely transformed the field of literary studies in the Western academia. For example, it is not possible that the discipline called as cultural studies is not possible without literature or literary theory. the new discipline called as post-colonial studies is not possible without literary theory. So literary theory had entered into Western academia in the 1980s, and it has completely transformed that particular academic scene, and from there it has actually traveled to other parts of the world. Now in India, we need to take this particular thing very seriously, not because this is a new academic fad and so whatever they do we should do it after 10 years. No, as I've already told you that theory is very important in so many ways. As I've already told you that theory can be it transforms the discipline you work in. you know uh, it is a self-reflexive inquiry into the value-laden assumptions. Those assumptions can be psychological, cultural, ideological, that actually lend coherence, and it lends structure to that academic discipline. Now we who are in English literature departments in India, we need to be very, very welcoming of theory for many, many reasons. Because, theory gives you that wherewithal, or theory gives you those conceptual tools whereby you can critically analyze so many things. And that is why, the origin of English literature departments in India, as I've already told you, is in the project of colonialism. That famous book by Gauri Vishwanathan, where she has brought to our notice that English literature was first of all introduced in India, and then it was introduced in England. Now, why was it introduced? It was introduced because we all know Gramsci, that famous Italian Marxist thinker, who said that there are two ways whereby the ruling class controls the ruled class. One is by coercion. Coercion means by instilling fear in the mind of people, army and police and institutions like that. And the second way of controlling the ruled class or the population under subjugation is by consent. Now, how do you do that? You do that because you impress upon the minds of those ruled classes that they are culturally inferior. They don't have that kind of value structure, and that is why they should abide by the kind of value structure or the value system which the ruling class is imposing on them. And that is why the introduction of English literature in India at the beginning of the 19th century was an attempt of imposing that cultural hegemony on Indian population. They wanted to imbibe upon us that culturally you are so inferior and you don't have this kind of things, and that is why you should say yes to the colonizer. So that's why Gauri Vishwanathan has very aptly titled her book as Masks of Conquest. The conquest means victory. They had conquered us politically. The Battle of Plassey, the Battle of Buxar, we know that they took the political control in their hands after these two battles, but they wanted to enslave us culturally, and the project, the vehicle of that cultural enslavement was literature, English literature, the introduction of English education in India and the introduction of English literature. Even today, if you ask our students, can you name 5 Indian writers, that student will take some time to remember these names. And if you ask him or her who are the 5 great British poets, that person will speak like a parrot, this and that and this and that and this and that. So naturally, they have become successful in their project. They did become successful in their project of enslaving us culturally by introduction of this thing. Now, if the origin of English literature studies in India lies in this cultural, let us say, cultural vehicle for power and dominance, then can we continue or should we continue? Should we continue of imparting education in this discipline in this discipline in the similar way? For example, when you design, this comes to the board of studies meetings, when they decide the curriculum for special papers, English literature papers for degree and post graduation, then people would see that, we design the same courses, as if, English poetry, or somewhere you have courses designed according to historical time frames. For example, English literature or British literature from 1350 to say 1650, 1650 to 1850, 18 modern literature, Victorian literature, romantic literature, as if it is the only literary tradition which is worth knowing. So now if we continue with in the same way, because see, English departments were created, or the introduction of English literary studies in India was to reproduce, or was to impose on us the cultural supremacy into quote marks upon us, or enslave us culturally. If we continue teaching in the same fashion, if we continue teaching, if we continue designing the same courses, don't you think that even after the political decolonization, 15th August 1947, are we not party, are we not complicit, are we not contributing to that colonial project? Now the British don't want that to happen, but we are continuing. And that is why our classroom is a reproduction of that kind of knowledge which they wanted us to produce. And that is why it is a reproductive kind of scenario. I would always say that a classroom should be productive rather than reproductive. Now, so does it mean that we should abandon the study of English literature? Does that mean that we should stop studying anything from them? No, it doesn't mean that. It means that we should not continue in the similar fashion or similar vein. We should develop strategies of reading, or strategies of, let us say, study, which will try to counter what they wanted to achieve through the education of that kind of education. And let us ask this question to ourselves as to how many of us are aware of this. How many of us are aware that that was the project of colonialism? Now we are a decolonized society. We have achieved the political decolonization, but I'm very sorry to bring to your notice that the cultural decolonization is yet to be achieved. And it is not achieved because the kind of knowledge which the colonizer produced about us, about Indians, we are using the same knowledge frameworks to analyze our society and to analyze our lives and analyze our culture. So naturally, we are reproducing the same knowledge structures. And that is why I said that, especially in literature departments, our classroom has become reproductive. It hasn't, it needs to be productive. And the only way it can become productive is by re-evaluating, reimagining the classroom scenario. And what can help us in this way? Theory can help us, because theory, as I've already told you, it is interdisciplinary, it is analytical and speculative, it critiques the commonsensical ideas, and the last thing is that it is reflexive. So we can use those tools, and we can reorient the face of English literary studies in India, so that we will be able to rescue it from the clutches of the colonial knowledge production structures. And then we will be able to salvage the project of English literary studies in India. And let us try to teach literary criticism as a way of rendering this very idea, this very notion of literature problematic. Now, what is exactly this thing called as literature? Now, please remember, when in England they started teaching literature, they started, teaching of literature involves preparing anthologies and preparing your canon. Canon means the list of standard authors. Now, when you decide on canon, race, gender, class, these many structures actually come and influence your canon selection. For example, if I ask this question to anybody who's attending this session, who is the first novelist in England, then people would say that, of course, Richardson and Smollett and this and that, or some people will go back to, say, Daniel Defoe, but there was a woman called as Afra Bain who wrote a famous novel called as Orunoku in 1680s or something like that, and she's not included anywhere. Now, why did that happen? Did that happen because people who were dealing with literature and who were actually trying to carve out this discipline, they were males, and that is why the contribution of a woman was not taken into account. That was not canonized as such. So now what this theory in their country, what theory has done is, it has rendered these ideas very problematic. Now, to make to problematize a particular thing doesn't mean that you deny the existence of that thing. For example, if I ask you the if I ask this question, is there God, it doesn't mean that I'm denying the existence of God. What I'm saying is that what do we mean by this concept of God, and how has this concept come into being, and how has this concept operated. Now, this is a very fruitful way of looking at it, rather than saying that, oh, he is an atheist and should be debarred from discussion. That is not going to help us. That is not very productive. So now, in even in England, when this first literature syllabus was introduced, it I'll give you just one example. F.R. Lewis wrote that famous book called as The Great Tradition. F.R. Lewis was one of the big names in English literary studies at the beginning of 20th century. And if you look at the writers, 6 writers he has included in that particular book, there is no author from working class there. Does it mean that working class did not produce literature? Working class did not write poetry? Working class did not write novels? Working class did not write plays? Yes, of course, the working class produced all these things, but uh, you know, but the people who were in charge of forming the canon, they were gender blind, they were class blind, they were I should say race blind, and that is why in British canon they did not include this. But when theory came on the scene, when the first generation of working class started attending classes in Oxford and Cambridge, I'm talking about Raymond Williams and Richard Hogarth, they thought that, okay, it talks about this particular discipline, talks about British culture, but this is the culture of aristocrat class, where what about our culture? What about our artifacts? And that is why they started criticizing it, and they started problematizing the concept of literature. And there you have that famous book by Richard Hogarth, The Uses of Literacy, where the common songs composed by the working class were analyzed and were shown that they are no less than poetry written by Wordsworth, Coleridge, Tennyson, and company. So how could Raymond Williams and Hogarth do it? Because they were greatly influenced by the Marxist ideas. By using Marxist theory, they tried to problematize the very concept of literature, and they showed as to how the idea of literature is a construct itself, and how it tries to dominate you, how it tries to dominate a particular kind of culture. Now, even later on, feminists, now feminism draws upon sociology, political theory, psychoanalysis, so many things. Even feminist critics, Kate Millett's famous book, The Sexual Politics, or, Susan Gubar and Sandra Gilbert, The Mad Woman in the Attic, where they tried to problematize the concept of literature and try to bring to our notice as to how women's writings are also worthy of being called as literature. So they problematize the idea of culture, they problematize the idea of, let us say, canon. So that gave rise to the project of cultural studies, that gave rise to the opening up of the field. So I think in India, if we could borrow on this kind of theorization, and if we could use this material, it would be able to shape, it would be able to help us in reorienting this particular phenomenon in different way. And one of the ways of teaching literature, one of the ways of doing theory is a way of acknowledging the historical contingency of ethical and social values. Now, what was, for example, now remember, when English literature was introduced in the 19th century, they believed that universal values are to be found here now, but those values are not universal values, when they were criticized by philosophers. Remember that famous book by Friedrich Nietzsche, Beyond Good and Evil, where he looks at the Christian values and tries to show that these values look to be very nice and everything. But these values have actually played a very important role in establishing the dominance of one particular class, one particular religion, one particular, let us say, culture upon other cultures. So that is another very interesting way of looking at this. So what I believe is, see, I have tried to cover 3-4 points so far. What I did in the beginning was I tried to show to you as to what is this phenomenon called theory is. Then we talked about what are the characteristics of this thing which we call as theory. Then I talked about what is the what is the effect, or what are the effects theory had in literature departments. And from there I came to Indian scenario, and I tried to bring to your notice the problematics of our discipline in India. Now there in the Western academic, they have a very interesting discipline called as cultural studies, where a fashion can be a text, a movie can be a text, let us say, any artifact produced by anybody can be a text. For example, I always had this problem in the beginning. I'm a huge fan of popular literature, and I read Agatha Christie and other popular writers, and I always thought that, why is this not given the status of literature, and why only that is given the status of literature? For example, I read that magnificent novel by that American lady called Gone with the Wind. Now every American has read it, but it was not included on the syllabus list because it was considered as a popular writing. It was not considered as literary. So anything, this kind of constructions are way of some kind of power politics, power politics in terms of race, power politics in terms of gender, power politics in terms of sexualities, power politics in terms of class. So that is how, theory, the other day somebody asked me the question, why how to do theory. And my answer to that question was very simple. When you look at a particular phenomenon, you should ask this question to yourself, that what kind of reading will be sufficient to understand this particular phenomenon for me. I'll give you a very interesting example. The Shakuntala thing in Indian history is a very interesting phenomenon. We all are aware of that famous play which Kalidas wrote called Abhinyan Shakuntala. Then there is a famous essay by Tagore on Shakuntala. But the basic story actually comes from the Mahabharata. And if you read, now I'm actually talking about the Pune edition, the Pune critical edition of the Mahabharata. If you read, I'm not talking about the sanitized or abridged versions. I'm talking about the critical edition which was brought out by the Bhandarkar Institute. There, if you the Shakuntala story occurs in Adi Parva. There is a section called as Shakuntala Akhyan. And in that, if you look at what happens, we know the sanitized version of it, that King Dushyanta came to the forest and he fell in love with this beautiful girl. They secretly married, and then the king said that, let me go back to the capital, and I will send people to, bring you back to the capital and things like that. And then as a token of their love, he gives them the ring. He gives her the ring because king that that is sharp from Durvas, and that is why the ring is lost. Dushyant doesn't remember Shakuntala, and then there is conflict. Then Shakuntala is thrown away, and Shakuntala goes to jungle, and then after some time Dushyanta realizes his mistake and goes back to Shakuntala. That doesn't happen in the Mahabharata. No. If you read the critical edition, there is no sharp, there is no Durvasa, and there is nothing like that. It's a plain story where a king comes to the jungle, he falls in love with this girl. This girl is a very strong woman, and she says that, okay, I am ready to marry to you, but on one condition, my son will become the king. Now, here is a woman who is very assertive and very dominant, and the king agrees on this, and then they have that Gandharva Vivaha. After that, the king goes back, the lady doesn't go with the king because she's waiting for her foster father to come. And when the foster father comes, and when she realizes that she's pregnant, she goes to the darbar. No incident of the ring and nothing of that fish. And there she says that, see, you had come to our ashram, you had married me, and now here is your son, and do accept me. The king says that that the language which is used in that exchange is the language of the straight. Dushyanta calls her names, and she also calls him names, and on her own she leaves the darbar, the royal court, and goes away. And then later on, they patch up. But this particular kind of, because if you read the Mahabharata very carefully, you would see that the women in the Mahabharata have great deal of freedom. Kunti could have children from the gods other than her married husband. Then Draupadi could marry 5 different people. Hidimba and Bhim could marry, and things like that. So women have that kind of greater sexual freedom in that text. But when the text becomes very popular, that becomes the way of life. And then Kalidasa's Shakuntal, Abhidhan Shakuntalam, was composed in the 4th century. When that was composed, you see that that kind of that kind of dominant, assertive voice of Shakuntala is gone. She's a very submissive person. It's like that Hindi film song, शर्माती है मुझे कहने में मगर मुझे आपके चरणों में रहना होगा. So how has that transformation taken place? That transformation has taken place because 4th century is the century where Manusmriti was written, where the social and ethical system had completely changed. Now, we won't be able to understand this change if we do not adopt the interdisciplinary way of understanding this phenomenon, if we do not do theory. So theory in this way, it enriches your literary duty. And that is why I am of this opinion that we, especially in India, because of the problematic nature of the origin of our discipline and the legacy of colonialism, we have so many things to to deal with. And the one of the ways of dealing with it can actually be provided by theory, and that is why theory is very important as far as literary studies in Indian scenario is concerned. These were some scattered thoughts which I wanted to bring to your notice. I think it is already 12, it's 20 past 1. I think I have almost used up the allotted time to me. I think so. A brief, review of what I said. First of all, I talked about what is theory. Then I talked about the characteristics of theory. Then I talked about the radical potential of theory. Then I talked about the effects of theory in the Western academia. Then I brought the point home and brought to your notice the problematic nature of English literary studies in India, the problems which we have to deal with, and that is why theory can be really useful in untangling ourselves from these many complicated knots which we find ourselves in. And please remember one thing, I'm not saying that whatever those people have written we should just take it and apply it. That will be once again intellectual colonialism, that they will produce the knowledge and we will consume the knowledge. No, whenever the theory comes, we will have to renegotiate, we will have to supplement, if I could use that Derridian phrase, we will have to supplement it from our perspective, and then try to analyze, try to study cultural let us say cultural texts and literary texts by using this kind of theoretical paradigms, because it will make our readings of these things more rich and more complex. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. It was indeed a really insightful and enthusiastic lecture delivered by Professor Nitin Patil, sir. Thank you very much, sir, once again. Now, if anyone has any question, please ask to Professor Nitin Patil, sir. all the participants. You can unmute yourself and ask the question if you have any question.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yes, yes. Good afternoon.
Myself, Sikhi Kumari. Sir,
Mhm.
actually, I don't have a question. I just want to ask.
Yes, go ahead, please. Hello. Can't hear you.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, sir. Is my
Yes.
voice audible?
Yeah. Now you're audible. Please
Okay.
go ahead with your question.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Sir, actually, I have not finalized the topic, but still, I will be working on discovering or reinventing the image of Sita and Draupadi and the women
Wonderful.
of India.
Mhm.
So, sir, actually, I've thought to take a 19th and 20th century Indian writer like Shashi Deshpande novel and later novel. So please,
Mhm.
can you guide me for some books like on through which I should go?
Yeah, I mean, if you are, you see, I mean, if I've understood whatever you saying, then what you are trying to do is you are trying to look at the images of Indian women in the writings
Yes, sir.
of Shashi Deshpande and some other people, and
Yes, sir.
you are going to compare it with the Indian female prototypes such as Savitri and Sita and things like that. Is that
Yes,
what
sir.
you
The
want to
image
do?
of Sita
Okay,
and Draupadi.
okay,
Yes,
okay,
sir.
wonderful. There are many ways of doing it. If you the one way would be looking at these various representations of Indian women in the writings, contemporary writings, or let us say writings of a particular period from archetypal point of view. Archetypal point of view means whenever some in our day-to-day situation we say that, oh, you are just like Sati Savitri, or you are like this. So these prototypes work as archetypes. But then archetypes have their own politics. What kind of, suppose you say that if you find a particular image of a person and then you say that it's like Sita or it's like Draupadi, then what kind of gender politics is involved in it? So you will have to borrow a lot from sociology, then archetypal criticism, and then feminism. By taking all these insights into account, you can look at these different images, and I do believe that it is going to be a wonderful study. But then you will have to you will have to really zero in on your area, because right now it looks pretty open ended, and that is why I won't be able to point out exactly the thinkers and exactly the texts to you. Once you say that you're going to look at the image of, say, image of Sita in songs, or let us say in certain movies, or that kind of thing, then I'll be able to do it. I will be able to suggest something to you. So one way, obvious way, would be to do it in archetypal way. Locate the archetypes, locate their politics, and in order to do that, draw a lot from historical theory, psychoanalysis, and feminist theory. I hope that
Thank you,
that
sir.
helps you.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for your question.
Is there another question? If anyone have any question, okay.
Hello, uh,
Yes.
I am Dr. Kiran Mani Tripathi. Actually, I wanted to know what is the contribution of Indian philosophers or writers regarding critical theories, whether they also have created, because maximum are from outsiders, not from India.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at post-colonial theory, then you would see that most of the significant contributions to post-colonial theory has come from two Indian thinkers, two major thinkers. One is Homi K. Bhabha, and the other is Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak. There is Ejaz Ahmed too. There are quite a few people actually. Now, this is one thing, and secondly is, this is a very important question, that if you look at the global transaction of theory, it seems that the Western theory is dominating the scene. But it is because we Indians we have to have that critical engagement with this theory. Now, what do I mean by critical engagement? Towards the end of my talk, I said that we need not adopt the Western theory in toto and apply it. We need to renegotiate it. So there are quite a few Indian people who are actually contributing a great deal as far as theory is concerned. For example, in history, in the field of academic discipline of history, you have something called as Subaltern Studies Collective, a group of Indian historians led by Ranajit Guha, Partha Chatterjee, Gautam Bhadra, Dipesh Chakravarti, and these people have given a new paradigm of historiography to the world. So there are Indian contributions, and we really need to draw on them, and we need to actually make them visible. So it's not as if that we lag behind, or we don't have that kind of theory production. We do have. The only thing is that, for example, anybody see what are our lived realities: caste, class, gender. These are our lived realities. So we have thinkers who have who have written analytical and in an analytical and speculative way on these issues. For example, Ambedkar. For example, Phule. For example, and remember one thing, before Virginia Woolf could write A Room of Her Own, our Tarabai Shinde had written Man-Woman Comparison in India in 1883. So we have this kind of tradition. The only thing is that we need to make it visible. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Very enlightening, very wonderful session, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank you
so
so
much,
much.
sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your
Really, I
kindness.
got the concept clear, very much clear, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Hello. Is there anyone who wants to ask a question? You can ask. And be fast.
Maybe people are tired now. They
Yeah.
are back-to-back sessions. So
So-
and plus theory always tires you out. So maybe now people are tired out.
Yes.
But sir, it is still very much interesting topic.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm from LN City, Bhopal, sir.
Okay, wonderful.
Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, so people from all over the country have joined, and good. I mean, we could meet this way. So I hope everybody is safe now. I would say that stay home, stay safe.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you once again.
It was my pleasure.
Yes. The last part of the program is vote of thanks. So I would like to invite Professor P.D. Sundare, head of our department, English department. P.D. Sundare.
Sir, please, excuse, sir.
Yeah. Okay.
Sir, Suresh Bansod.
Yeah.
One question, sir, please.
Okay, sir. Yes,
Sir, I'm Suresh. Yeah, I'm Suresh Bansod from Amravati, sir.
Good afternoon.
Very good afternoon. Thank you, sir. Very informative lecture. But one question raised in my mind, as we have said that the theory is a speculative and analytical one. It means that it is the speculations and analyzation of one particular individual. So my question is it necessary in a literature that we accept all whatever he said?
No.
Finalized, sir, who finalized it, or who has given, who authenticized the theory? Is it compulsory for us to accept all that, whatever he analyzed?
No, not really. I mean, it is entirely up to you whether you want to accept theory or you want to reject theory. Because if you want to accept theory or reject theory, that is entirely your privilege. But then it throws some light on what kind of a reader you are. Okay, right? For example, when I was talking about this theoretical development, I said that whenever you try to analyze a particular text, you should ask this question to yourself: what kind of a reading will give more and more complex and enriched reading of this particular text. For example,
Yes,
I'll give you another example. We all have read that story. That story has been imbibed. It is instilled in our mind. It's a story from the Mahabharata. Arjun and they study in the ashram with Dronacharya, and Eklavya story basically, right? I mean, then Eklavya comes and then Dronacharya says that no, I cannot accept you because I only teach the royal kids. And Eklavya goes back and he studies the archery on his own. And then after a few years, when these Dronacharya and Pandavas and Kauravas they go to jungle, there's a dog incident, right? A dog is barking at Dronacharya, and suddenly a flurry of arrows comes, and it closes the mouth of the dog in a way that it doesn't hurt the dog a bit. And then he says that who is this great archer? And then Eklavya comes. Dronacharya doesn't recognize him, and Dronacharya says that who are you? And then he says that I'm your shishya. And he takes him to a particular place where he's erected the bust of Dronacharya, and he's learned that thing at his feet. And then Dronacharya says that okay, I'm your teacher, so now you should give me Guru Dakshina. And Eklavya says, okay, what is that? And then he says that I want the thumb of your right hand. And that way he incapacitates Eklavya from archery and his future competition with Arjun or other people. Now, whenever we read this story, and if we read it as a value education or things like that, that is how the story has been narrated to us. And then we said that, oh, this is how every student has to be, and this is how every guru has to be. Now, this is a very dangerous thing. But if you look at this particular story from cultural point of view, from political point of view, from racial point of view, it gives you so many things. It talks about the kind of racial inequality which was present in India. It talks about the difference in Indian society. So it gives you a more enlightened and more what should I say, complex meaning. We are able to understand this phenomenon in its what should I say, in greater detail, rather than if we just focus on one particular area. So nobody has given legitimacy to theory. It is up to you.
yes.
If you want to understand the complex nature of the things, then you will take theoretical point of view. Otherwise, you are happy to go back to your liberal humanist stand. Thank you.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. The last part of any program is vote of thanks. So I would like to call Professor P.D. Sundari sir for the vote of thanks. Thank you very much, sir. Professor Nitin Patil sir.
Thank you so much. It was my pleasure, and thank you for your questions.
Good afternoon, sir. Honorable Research Person, Dr. Muhammad Abdul Sami Siddiqui, Honorable Dr. Nitin Patil, dignitaries and all the participants. It's my privilege to have been asked to propose a vote of thanks on this occasion. On behalf of English Department, I extend a very heartfelt thanks to Honorable Research Person who blessed us with their presence and took out a valuable time of their busy schedule. Also, I express my heartfelt congratulations to all the participants for their active participation in this webinar. I am very grateful to Honorable President Sri Atmaramji Amar Singh Rathod and Honorable Dr. Ashwin Kumar Naik for giving us opportunity to organize this webinar. I also wish to express my gratitude toward the respected Principal Dr. L.K. Karangade for providing motivation and support. Once again, I thank all you for your cordial cooperation. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. And with the permission of the chair, I declare this webinar is over. Thank you, sir. It is being to your notice that all the participants will get participant certificates after filling the feedback form. Feedback form link will be sent on Telegram group. Okay, thank you again very much. Thank you, sir. Siddiqui sir, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. It was my pleasure. Thank you.